Hello there and welcome to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. This is season 16, episode 28. This episode is sponsored by SiteShift, Citrea, Bitcoin.com News, Huddling.ch, Layer 2 Labs, and NoOnes.com. And we are live to present something special for Pizza Day, actually. It's a launch which was under embargo. I found out about it. And I basically turned what was supposed to be an article into a podcast, and I want to thank the participants who are here today for joining on such a short notice. We have Summer Meng, we have Charles Chong. I hope I don't mispronounce your last names, and I apologize in advance. And we also have Spencer. And is it Tang? Is that how I pronounce it, Spencer?
Oh yeah, Spencer Yang will be good. Super awesome to be here.
They are here to represent Fractal Bitcoin and also BitMars, which are mining companies. And much more than this, there is like an alliance of 11 mining companies, which starting today is going to work together to push research in the field of proof of work, which seems to be marginalized in this phase of the market. It seems like proof of stake is more fashionable. The amount of proof of work projects is much smaller than it used to be. And it's good to see these initiatives. So it's good to have you on the show. Welcome. Okay, so let's establish some sort of order, or you can join whenever you want. But my first question is, what is this alliance about and how did you come to it?
Can I take that?
Yeah, I think, Vlad, like you mentioned earlier, I think these days proof of work isn't as fashionable anymore. But I think we have to be reminded that with the birth of Bitcoin, proof of work was the first widely adopted consensus mechanism out there. And then in the early days, any blockchain protocols that launched, proof of work was the primary choice for them. I think these days we are lucky to see even one new proof of work chain launch in a year. So I think let's dive into why is that so. I think the primary reason is it's very hard to bootstrap a proof of work network. You need buy-in from miners from day one. And it's not just them buying your tokens, it's them investing in their capex in buying their machines and then having a long-term view that this is the project that they want to support. But besides the miners, you also need support from mining pools as well, and potentially even machine manufacturers if you are going the ASIC route. But then on the other hand, if you don't go the ASIC route and you were thinking, hey, I'm going to go with some algorithms that use a GPU, I think you would face an even larger hurdle getting the miners to mine it, because all the miners have their sites built for ASICs. So the power draw, the form factor, the shoebox mining form factor, you won't be able to get miners to mine your coin. So again, which is why, given the difficulty in bootstrapping this proof of work networks, we see a lot of other protocols choosing proof of stake or other alternatives today. So which is why we came together and formed the Proof of Work Alliance, because we deeply believe that proof of work does offer superior security and also decentralization that many seem to have forgotten. So we formed this Proof of Work Alliance with 11 founding members here. And then we have a very diverse representation in terms of geographic regions, but also the types of players in the ecosystem. We have mining pools, miners, machine manufacturers, service providers, and also different proof of work protocols here. So again, the goal here is to grow the proof of work ecosystem as a whole.
Spencer,
I guess chime in a little bit.
Yeah, I guess you wanted to jump in.
Happy to chime in a little bit. I think like to build on what Charles mentioned, right? I think when we first spoke to the various founding members and also like other industry participants, we realized that there's just I would say like a lack of like focus on this particular area. And I think a lot of times in the Bitcoin community and in the crypto community, there's a bit of a stigma against alliances, right? Because it kind of like also like some people say that, hey, this is like, are you deciding things behind closed doors and so on. I think ultimately the vision and why we started this is really so that we can encourage more open collaboration, more research, and a lot of the research, the learnings and so on, we want to essentially have the avenue to have these publications be public from day one and have and develop open source projects and tools together. And I think as what we have mentioned as well, it's really interesting, in the space, right? I mean, Bitcoin since 2009 has been popularized, I guess, over the past couple of years. And I think in recent years, it's almost like we've almost forgotten about the underlying consensus, the underlying technology, and a lot of these coordination efforts. Right? We definitely have seen public listed companies, go public because they're mining companies and Bitcoin mining companies. But I think from a research perspective, there's been a lack of attention and focus. And we think that over here there's an opportunity definitely for more collaboration and more thoughts. But yeah, really excited to be on this podcast to share a little bit more of our thinking. And I think at the end of the day, each Alliance member, whether it's a founding members or whether it's a future members, all have different views and opinions, right? And I think that's what makes an Alliance awesome. It's this ephemeral, but also very, I guess we are tied together by a mission, but at the same time, everyone has their own interests, and that's really the beauty of decentralization and the beauty of crypto economic systems as well.
Summer?
Yes, I agree. So when Charles just mentioned about it, I really like the idea of the PoW Alliance, because it's like, I think it's really good to build this platform and then to unite people in the industry to work together. Like today, we all face the same challenges, but we all stand alone and work alone by ourselves. For example, you can see that many miner suppliers and manufacturers are from China, but it's like maybe there are some different reasons because of maybe like language barriers and maybe cultural difference that prevent us like from connecting and communicating more with the community. So I really think that that's the meaning of like proof of work alliance, that unite people together, and then we gather together to exchange insights, to share the knowledge. Like this, I always think that's like people is always about people, so it's really good that you build this and the platform to bring us together. It's like, I think each of us is like a drop of the ocean. So we gather together, we can build greater things together and also a greater future. So I'm happy to be part of it.
Yeah, so you mentioned that there are 11 founding members of this Proof of Work Alliance. Who are the others? Because unfortunately, this was set up in a very short amount of time. I wish I could have all 11 companies represented here, but we shouldn't forget about them because they're also a significant part of this.
Yeah, so let me share who are the members today. And again, we are launching today with 11, but we welcome new members to join. This is just our initial group. Let's launch this and then continue to get more members to join. So in terms of the members, from mining pool perspective, we have F2 pool and SpiderPool. And then from hardware perspective, obviously we have Summer from BitMars here and also Alpha Packs. And then in terms of mining company, we have Fortitude Crypto, which is a spun off from Foundry. And then in terms of PoW protocols, we have Fractal, we have Psy protocol and etc. Oh, and also for hardware, we also have iPolo as well. And then from a cloud mining service provider, we have Standard Hash and also Bit.com crypto exchange.
Interesting. So let me ask you this, because it's been a rough few years. We have had an initiative from Greenpeace, which was trying to get Bitcoin to change its consensus and mining mechanism. It was called Make the Code Green or something like that. And there was a stigma until the moment BlackRock started investing in Bitcoin. There was a lot of stigma concerning proof of work. And they were saying, well, it's boiling the oceans. Well, it consumes more electricity than the state of, I don't know, I think it was Denmark. It is wasteful because it creates a lot of, how should I put it, defective hardware that cannot be used for anything else once it's damaged and cannot be used to mine anymore. There are a lot of these narratives that Bitcoin is, and proof of work mining in general, is causing a lot of damage to the environment. And my question for you is, how do you respond when you deal with these allegations?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that when it comes to proof of work, it's really about incentives, right? As with most things. I think a lot of things that powers today's infrastructure, whether it's AI, whether it's crypto economics, is really based on, I guess, something that's fundamental, right? And that's demand. And I think demand from a Bitcoin and also from a crypto perspective is real, right? People do need a electronic peer-to-peer electronic currency, and I think that's what we have created as an industry that is awesome, and we should and it's worth celebrating. Right? And then if you look at other industries like the AI industry as well, there's a lot of people using chatbots, ChatGPT, or image recognition, video generation, whatsoever, right? And I think that productive output, I think, is what we humans really want. And I think the usage of energy, resources, and time, attention to be able to power that demand, I think that's very, very important. And then I think we take a further step back and look at where the Bitcoin mining industry is today from a usage of power perspective. I totally agree with you, right? That from a usage of power perspective, we are at the maybe like 4 times that of what Singapore consumes on a daily basis, right? That is awesome, but also kind of scary for many people, right? Especially as you mentioned, some of the Greenpeace advocates and whatnot. I think it's actually quite reassuring for me to know as well that many of the miners and the mining community have actually been using very, very sustainable and also renewable source of electricity to power Bitcoin mining today. So I think if you look at this report by Cambridge University that was recently published, it was mentioned that about 40%, 40 to 50% of energy that is used for Bitcoin mining today is actually from sustainable as well as renewable sources. And I think that's very encouraging. We would definitely see that energy numbers go, I guess the percentage go up as the world also recognizes the problem of fossil fuels and so on and transition to more sustainable and renewable sources as well. I think that's what we want to see, right? And I think as long as we keep driving demand, I think supply and with the industry efforts, we'll definitely catch up based on that.
Yeah, I think just to jump on Spencer's point, I think the running joke in the industry is always Bitcoin mining uses less electricity than Christmas lights. So should we ban Christmas lights, right? So I think at the high level, the usage of electricity power is correlated to the GDP of a country. So energy usage by itself, it's not bad. It's about what is it a good use of that power. So if you think about, is it a good use of power to secure the Bitcoin network? I think many of us would agree that yes, it is. But also I think the other thing to keep in mind is Bitcoin miners are the most price sensitive electricity power users. So they go for the cheapest power. And what are the cheapest power? It's renewable, it's your hydro, your solar, your wind farm, which is why we saw Mara, they went out and purchased a wind farm. They did not go out and purchase a gas turbine or any other fuel sources out there. And then also a lot of miners have been going for stranded gas. Again, this stranded gas, if you burn them, it's even more damaging to the environment. So I think Bitcoin mining is helping the environment in a lot of ways. I think the other thing that we should note as well is how it stabilized the grid. I think most people don't understand that the role that Bitcoin miners play in stabilizing the grid, supporting demand response programs. I think those are great benefit to the power grid and environment as well.
I was wondering if Summer wants to add something.
No, I don't have much to add at this point. I think they already covered pretty much. But it's like from our clients, we can see that a lot of like Bitcoin mining actually already like renewable energy, like for example, like Nordic countries, even in Texas is the same, So a lot of mining is actually already like helping to stabilize more energy.
So when you said, Spencer, that AI farms are also a thing right now, I was actually thinking, do you think that the rise of these large language models and their popularization for generating answers and images and stuff like this has helped the proof of work industry by legitimizing it and saying, there's actually good ways for you to consume electricity? Or do you think it's been detrimental because you're competing for the same electricity that's being produced, and maybe you're also competing for hardware?
Yeah, happy to weigh in with my thoughts over here. And I think I actually love to hear from Charles and also from Summer what their thoughts about, like the infrastructure side of things set up and whatnot, right, for AI versus, like Bitcoin mining and proof of work. But overall, my thesis has always been that it's really about productive usage, right? And I think AI has, I think if you notice right now, there's an AI race. between countries, between companies, between just so many individuals, right? I think recently, just yesterday or the day before, OpenAI announced that they're acquiring Johnny Ive, who's the previously the head of design for Apple's company, and essentially is some some critics say that he's just an expensive acqui-hire, right, of 6.5 billion. Some people say that it's a real thing, and I think we're gonna have like devices, right? But if you think about it, it actually places OpenAI in a competition between them, as well as maybe Apple and maybe Google with Android devices and whatnot. And I think it's very, very fascinating, right? It's super fascinating to see that our hardware is also being the battlefront. But fundamentally, a lot of these models rely on centralized infrastructure because it's just more efficient, right? For example, if you and I actually have a desktop PC or a desktop device to run AI models, I don't think that will be able to scale as well as that of centralized servers. But at the same time, we actually see a lot of privacy advocates do that. I think it's actually a little bit similar to crypto, right? Where traditional finance is a very centralized sort of infrastructure, right? But at the same time, when we look at the distributed ledger of Bitcoin, that everyone is verifying and so on, it's actually decentralized around the world, right? But of course, in order to get some level of efficiency, it's also helpful to centralize some of these, ASICs, infrastructure in certain zones. But it's not to the point where everyone in the network is relying on their one infrastructure or one location, right? There's so many sites around the world, and I think that's the beauty of it, right? And I think that's similar to AI as well. So there's definitely see some similar patterns where some areas are a little bit more centralized as is necessary, but for the most part, we are really striving for that decentralization across the board.
Yeah, I think if you look at traditional data centers have been around for quite some time, and they have been pulling quite a bit of power as well, but we don't see the same kind of headline back then. I think Bitcoin mining was drawing a lot more headline. I think that was the they fight you stage, so that's where we got a lot of negative headline. Some of them, when I read them, I think many of them were inaccurate and factually wrong as well. So I think that was just an attack against Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general. But I think these days with AI data centers, we do see some headlines around AI data centers as well. I think it's for two primary reasons. I think it's just the growth of the AI data centers. I think the traditional data centers, it took a long time to grow over time, so the impact wasn't felt right away. But I think there's so much power going to AI data center these days. But I think the other reason is the power density. So in the traditional data center world, a rack probably pulls like 10 kilowatt of capacity, whereas today with your H100s, H200s, one rack can pull up to 100, 200 kilowatts. So it's like 10 times more than the previous racks. So I think the power density is what's drawing headline as well. And then, as we know, one single Bitcoin miner draws 3.5 kilowatt, which is quite a lot, but I think it's somewhere in the middle between the traditional data centers and the AI data centers. So again, back then with your traditional data centers, they built 10, 20 megawatt sites. But with Bitcoin mining and AI data centers, you are hearing 200, 500 megawatts, which is why, again, it's drawing all these headlines.
Right, so when I read about your alliance, I've also remembered about a moment in 2021, I think, so 4 years ago, when Elon Musk accepted Bitcoin for payments on the Tesla store. So you could actually buy a brand new car using your Bitcoin. And then a couple of weeks later, he said, well, most of Bitcoin mining is damaging to the environment, and therefore I'm going to remove Bitcoin as a method to pay. And I'm not going to add it until it's sustainable enough. And what happened afterwards is that Michael Saylor and a bunch of other North Americans from Marathon, from what's the other big one? Foundry. They decided to establish what is today called the North American Bitcoin Alliance. And they joined that organization, and it seemed like a lot of mining centralization happening, because at the time, mining had migrated from being mostly Chinese-centric to being mostly USA-centric. It was like this moment of transition, and it seemed very weird. And now you're making a new alliance, and I want to ask you, do you believe that these alliances are making anything more centralized, or if there is a greater chance to have pools agreeing with each other to maybe reorganize the blockchain or do stuff like this to get the 51% majority?
Yeah, I can take that. I think we have to separate. So between, I think there's two levels here. At the bottom level, I think each member company or each company in this space have their own economic interest, whereas at the higher level, they have the interest of Bitcoin and the network in general. So I think we have to understand that there's these two levels. So when we talk about the potentially members colluding, again, I think each company operates so that they are protecting their own economic interests and not sacrificing their own economic interests. So I think when we form this alliance, we do want it to be neutral, which is why instead of just saying, hey, let's form a mining pool alliance or let's form a hardware manufacturer alliance. So we decided to form a PoW alliance where we invite members from all these different verticals. Again, that way we can stay even more neutral because now every member has a say and no member in each of this vertical would like collusion in other verticals.
100%. I would say that I think overall collusion is bad for crypto, right? I think it sometimes naturally forms because of certain shared interests and whatnot, right? And I think that's something that I generally do not like because what happens is that it definitely creates it creates distrust and and I think crypto is one of those ecosystems, whether it's Bitcoin and so on, where essentially we have decentralized ownership, we have decentralized setups and so on, essentially with code to allow us to not have to trust each other, but to also be able to coordinate, right? And I think that's why sometimes it's helpful to have some level of social communities and whatnot. But I think when it comes to the alliance, right, and I think there's 2 points here, right? One is about the risks, and the other part is about the rewards, right? But I think from a risk perspective, I think having a very, very diverse group of participants, I think really helps to essentially have everyone's views to be considered, right? And usually when that happens, then there's no real incentive for some level of collusion. And it really helps to reduce the risk, right? So anyone can also kind of sound out if they see anything fishy, anything weird. I think it's really on every single member to essentially make sure that their interests are protected, right? And have a seat at the table. And then the second thing about this is the reward, right? I think what's the benefit of having everyone and a lot of these key participants involved is so that as we champion some ideas, a lot of things that maybe doesn't make sense from a higher level perspective for everyone can be essentially refuted or can be spoken about, right? So there's a little bit more representation. It's almost like when it comes to the U.S. presidential elections, you have polls, right? And polls of and I think today polls are actually pretty accurate. But of course, we've seen in recent elections, maybe that's a really bad example because in previous elections, the polls have been quite bad at telling the truth sometimes, right? But it's a little bit like a poll, right? I think it's probably the easy way to say it, but we shouldn't trust polls, right? But at the same time, I think polls are still useful, and which is why we use them today. So I think that's kind of how I think about an alliance in general.
And I think I just want to add one more point. I think so Bitcoin is decentralized governance, but there is some sort of social coordination as well. Just like we see Bitcoin core developers talking to each other, we need some sort of a coordination layer. And then in terms of mining, I think one example I can give here is Stratum V2. So Stratum V2 is an idea that's been thrown around, that's been around for like a very long time. But then to actually implement it, you actually need social coordination among different players. It now becomes a chicken and an egg problem. Like, do hardware manufacturers enable it first, or do mining pools need to support it first? So this is where, and then if it's only one mining pools, or do all mining pools need to support it at the same time? So again, this becomes like a social coordination problem as well.
Yeah, another big issue that I see sometimes in mining, I mean, not sometimes, pretty much all the time, is that you have 2 or 3 companies which manufacture most of the ASIC chips. And you just have Bitmain, and the other big one is Avalon, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, I also have this one, which I've received from the husband of Summer, Christian. I want to thank him on live video because he sent me this. It's made by Brains. It's a tiny home miner. that also displays the price at the same time. It's like $300. It's cheaper than a block clock and actually mines. But once again, it's optimized for low noise and efficiency. It's not industrial scale. It cannot compete with an actual ant miner or something serious. But I do know that mining chips or ASICs for mining Bitcoin are just a small percentage of chip manufacturing. And it's been like this for many years. We have heard rumors about maybe Intel or AMD or Samsung and all of these large companies getting into the business of producing ASIC chips for mining. As far as I'm aware, they haven't. And my question for you is, how do you get more competition into this space? Because it seems like there is sort of an oligopoly of only a few players. And everyone's buying the miners from them. Most of the time they're not in stock. You have to find very good deals. Sometimes you get them used, but that's another old issue with Bitmain because they were sending used miners sometimes. Is there any way to mitigate this, to generate more competition?
I'll tackle this, and then Summer can go after me. So I think Bitcoin mining is still pretty new. I would say like the ASIC mining space is still not that mature. So I think if you look at when ASIC was first released, and then every year after that, we are seeing great improvements in terms of ASIC efficiency because they are using better chips and then better design. So huge improvement. And because of that, the R&D needed for it, it's very high. Like the early players invest tons of R&D into improving their ASIC design. So which is why we see it's hard for new players to enter the space back then. But I think we are starting to see that change these days because now most ASIC machines are already using the latest chips, the 3nm chips out there. And so we don't see as mush improvement anymore. And then SHA-256 has been around for a long time. So again, there's more expertise in the space on how to manufacture these chips. So which is why you saw a couple of open source projects at BitMars that you mentioned earlier. They were able to do this with low R&D budget. But then also we are seeing new players enter the space, right? So Aurodyne, based in US, is obviously a big contender these days. And then we are also seeing other folks at Chain Reaction. And also I believe Block, Core Scientific, and Epic are working on their own mining machines too. So I think we are seeing more decentralization happening these days. I think a lot of these newer players, their machines are not proven or better tested as much yet. So still optimistic to see them grabbing market share. Yeah, someone feel free to chime in.
Yes, I think ASIC mining manufacturing is like extremely capital intensive and complex. So it's like chip design and long R&D cycles, and also like large upfront investment, and there is no guarantee of success. So it is hard, it is hard. But like Charles just mentioned, I think nowadays we have like other players also enter into this game. For example, like Aurodyne just mentioned, they already have miners produced, and also we know that a bunch of companies are already like testing them. So, and also like recently BitDeer also released the Seal miner. So it's like there are people are entering. So we hope to see like more people to manufacture more miners, and also there are like competition. It will help the ecosystem to be better also.
I'm not sure if Spencer took a break or his camera died, but I was thinking if he wants to chime in to say something. Anyway, we'll move on. Maybe he's gonna come back and mention it. What I do also want to include in our conversation... Oh, he said he's gonna be right back. I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah. So what I do want to include in our conversation is the fact that there are still coins out there which are chasing this maybe chimera. I don't know, maybe it's an illusion because they have to hard fork all the time, but they're trying to stay ASIC resistant. And ASIC resistance mean that they want to stick to maybe what Satoshi Nakamoto thought was going to happen, that every computer that joins the network is gonna mine with their CPU, and he was not aware that there's gonna be mining pools, that there's gonna be GPUs, and then FPGAs, and then ASICs. I guess he didn't see this coming, or if he stuck around for long enough, maybe he would be more of a fan of hard forking just to preserve this vision of every user being able to mine. What do you think about this approach? Because obviously you're dealing with the business side of it and the larger industrial scale. Do you think it's healthy to have this sort of mining? Does it make it more decentralized, or once again, is it just a waste of time?
I think it's super hard to make something ASIC resistant unless it's fully randomized. I think in the early days, the approach is to adopt algorithms that are more memory heavy, but even so, a lot of those coins that were planning to become ASIC resistant, eventually that's an ASIC available as long as that's enough economic incentive and enough time for it. I think for mining, it's always going to be hard for if you just want to focus on retail miners and mining for everyone. Partly because there's always economy of scale, but also where your power is. So if you're located in the middle of Chicago, it doesn't make a lot of sense to mine there versus if you're in upstate New York. So I think the power cost is a big factor as well. And also how many retail can you actually get? I think even in Bitcoin mining today, I think retail probably comprise of like 5% of the entire network. But then if you look at the number of retail miners involved, there's probably a lot of them, but all of them added together is probably smaller than one single public mining company. So I think that's always going to be a challenge as well.
Yeah, I do agree with that overall thesis, which is that I think at the end of the day, when it comes to designing a successful proof of work network, right, and I think that's also the beauty of the proof of work alliance, because the members collectively have seen a lot of things happen in the industry, right? So for example, if I come into the Bitcoin space today, what I would do is I'll ask my friends who are in Bitcoin, hey, how do I buy Bitcoin, right? And then they will give me the answer, maybe Coinbase, Binance, whatsoever, right? And it's like, for example, if I were to come into the space today and I want to, let's say I'm a relatively new project, and I want to essentially work on something in a proof of workspace, whether it's to mine Bitcoin or to build miners or to do something, right? I think the question really is, there's a lot of history and there's a lot of research that has been done over the past couple of years, a lot of like experiments that have done. So many coins have launched, so many projects have launched, so many miners, mining firms have come and went, right? So I think at the end of the day, when it comes to an alliance, that's also the beauty of it, where a lot of the members have this experience and shared experience to essentially share ideas. But into a question about ASIC resistance, right? I think it's actually very interesting. Today is Bitcoin Pizza Day, right? So Laszlo, if you look at history, right, Laszlo actually was one of the first people to design a program, I think, to allow you to use like GPUs to mine Bitcoin. And I think Satoshi Nakamoto actually may or may not have actually emailed Laszlo and saying, hey, I actually thought this would be a little bit further out, right, than today. So I think maybe Laszlo, I speculate that maybe Laszlo felt a little bit guilty about like, accelerating the path of like, CPU to GPU mining for Bitcoin even back in the day. And that's why also he received a lot of Bitcoin from that. And, he bought pizza with that as well as a way of giving back to the community. But yeah, hey, at the end of the day, I think it's net good, right? When you have acceleration of sorts, a step change and so on, as long as people know and people can verify that on-chain, which is what happened, right? If you have a new ASIC that is more powerful, people can verify that you actually are mining at a higher efficiency and effectiveness, and then they will catch up, right? They will also do certain things, right? I think this is what we see even in the AI industry as well, where any manufacturer of like GPUs and so on that are very, very strong, when that happens, then other countries, other providers will also catch up. So I think that's also really interesting, right? Where at the end of the day, we are all just following Moore's law, right? And the cost, of these are, and also effectiveness is just really exponentially going up. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, costs are going down and effectiveness is going up. Yeah.
Do you see a moment when the adoption is going to be so high that everyone's going to purchase a tiny miner and use it as a lottery ticket, but the numbers of these miners is going to be so great that they're going to be able to compete with the large mining pools?
That's an interesting thought experiment, right? I've never thought about it that way, but let's say hypothetically, if you pose that question, I would say that I think there's always so like many developing countries and many countries in today, right? Even developed countries, right? Like in the US and so on. People actually still subscribe to the lottery because at the end of the day, everyone wants a dream of essentially, having a small chance, a very, very small chance, but a chance to essentially change their lives, right? And I think in some ways, if you actually were to be successfully able to mine on Bitcoin pod today, with let's say maybe Vlad, the miner that you have in a in the shelf, right? If you're able to do that, then that's definitely amazing, right? So I definitely think that it's a possibility as long as these devices and these things are stable and whatnot. I definitely think it's stable. But that being said, should that be the norm? I do not know, and I do not think so, at least for today, right? Because at the end of the day, we want some level of stability, right, and consistency. And I think a lot of the larger mining operations around the world provides a level of stability and security overall.
Yeah, I'm just looking at BitX hash rate. I think if I'm not mistaken, it's about 1 terahash. So in comparison, Marathon has 60 exahash. So that's 60 million of BitX that you need people to buy. So yeah, so I don't think it's gonna really surpass some of these large institutional miners. But at the end of the day, I think it's a good effort. I think anything we can do to decentralize and get people being an active participant versus just a passive investor, I think that does help.
Yeah, but if you want to stay bullish on this narrative, you can say, well, Germany has 80 million people. So if every person in Germany is going to acquire an ASIC miner and they put that in their home, they can compete with a large mining pool. I do hope it's going to happen. I don't think it will happen. But once again, someone who is much smarter than me told me that every heater that you use during winter is basically a wasteful piece that could have been mining Bitcoin instead.
Yeah, I agree with that thesis, right? And who knows, right? Let's say, for example, we have a zombie apocalypse, right? And then all the centralized power stations go out of business. Then the 60,000, the 60 million people in Germany, I think would be able to power the network. And that's awesome.
Your alliance in the press release says that it's trying to nurture innovation in the proof of work field. And I was wondering, what is the innovation that you're trying to improve? Is it about improving the hardware? Is it about making current hardware more efficient, so by optimizing the software? Or is it just about business and social relations?
I think it's all of the above. So again, we have members from different verticals. So different verticals do have certain focus areas, but other folks may be less interested in the other verticals, but it all affects everyone, right? So I'm just gonna throw out a couple of examples, right? So earlier you mentioned heat recapture. So again, that's an idea that's been thrown around for quite some time. So we have to understand, why is that still not a big thing? We do see miners adopting it and some manufacturers playing with that idea, but why is that not prevalent enough? Is it because of miner adoption? Like, where are the concerns? So I think those are some of the things we try to address. But then also, if you think about at the pool level or protocol level, so for example, there's a lot of conversations about non-standard transactions, like should that be included? But also math, right? So again, math has been a thing in Ethereum for a long time, and then it briefly appeared in the Bitcoin world during the Ordinance pump. But again, that's something that isn't discussed too much in the space. So we hope to get everyone involved to further discuss this kind of topics.
Just a
Yeah.
second,
And
there's a storm
at the
that
end of the day-
started outside. I need to close the window, so sorry. Okay, I'm back. So let's talk about innovation in the proof of work field, because I guess if you're not working in the proof of work field, you're gonna say that there was no innovation whatsoever. It's just hardware following Moore's law, and there isn't much stuff going on since maybe ASIC boost, which was a controversial topic in 2016-17.
Yeah, happy to share
Yeah,
some like possible thinking over here. Yeah, I think when it comes to the proof of work side of things, definitely, when it comes to Bitcoin and an established network like Bitcoin, I think when it comes to that, the ability for hardware manufacturers and so on to adapt and to be able to innovate, I think is very important. And I think that forms the chunk of the innovation happening in the space, right? From a monetary perspective and also from an investment perspective. So definitely we recognize that is the case on the Bitcoin side, right? But I think when you look at the broader proof of work ecosystem and also cryptocurrency ecosystem, there's a lot of other ideas and proposals that are being formed. Right? I think at the end of the day, the festival of innovation is really important because when there's more innovation, there's more people trying new things, then it helps to also increase the assurance and the security of Bitcoin, and also help to increase the consensus around Bitcoin as well, that hey, the mechanism is actually very sound, right? And I think that's been what happened over the past couple of years, right? And I think will continue to happen, I think, with everyone's efforts. There's definitely some talk about quantum computing and quantum resistance, I think in the broader technology space that I think is impactful to do more research on, and I think that could affect Bitcoin as well. There's definitely a lot of talk about how blockchain and Bitcoin rewards for miners is actually reducing. So any innovations, any protocols that supports merge mining, OxPoW, I think would be net beneficial to the Bitcoin miners because it actually increases the revenue for miners as well. Any innovations that like for even like improving the efficiency of home miners or heating or other kind of alternative sources, right? There's actually a bathhouse in New York that uses Bitcoin mining to help to heat the sauna in some ways. And I think a lot of these like little micro innovations is also important, right? To see and maybe even have some, maybe hypothetically, for example, to validate this, right? Maybe an entrepreneur, a very crazy idea, right? An entrepreneur can come up with a bathhouse network, right? That essentially uses a certain type of device that essentially heats all the bathhouses or whatever as a proof of work, right? As just to experiment, right? No one's trying to take over Bitcoin with those kind of efforts, right? But I think it's just really to increase the efficacy and also discovery of innovation such that we can increase the conversations. I think that's really some of the things just to highlight. And I'm curious as well, Summer and Charles, if you're seeing a lot of other ideas that could come up as well.
Yeah, so I also want to ask you about merge mining because you have mentioned it and it's a very interesting topic. Why do you believe that chains today choose to use proof of stake or maybe launch with their own individual mining algorithm as opposed to just becoming merged mine, which is with something which is more established, has its own infrastructure, has its own security model, provides all the primitives for a successful network already. So why do you believe merged mining is not more popular than it is today?
Yeah, let me take a step at this. So I think the benefit merge mining offers is to solve the bootstrap problem that I mentioned earlier, which is getting miners involved. If you are just merge mining with, let's say, SHA-256, then you do have an existing number of miners that are willing to merge mine it. But I think the downside of merge mining, especially in the early days, is as a miner, when I see someone saying, hey, you can merge mine this specific coin, as a miner, I view that as free money. I am not familiar with the protocol. I'm not committed to your protocol. I'll just mine it and sell it. So it does create that huge sell pressure for that protocol itself. So unless you do build up some sort of engagement consensus, and then yeah, so I think that's one of the reasons why protocols do not go for much money. I think the other piece is also to remember, even if their miners are committed to your project and is bullish on your project, do remember that unlike proof of stake, the miners do have external electricity costs that they do have to cover. So it does create those additional sell pressure as well.
Yeah, I think there's definitely pros and cons of like merge mining versus the other mechanisms, right? So I think Charles mentioned a few of these really interesting and very important takeaways that I think we've seen kind of play out in the market. I think just speaking about proof of stake a little bit, right? I think part of the reason why proof of stake is also extremely popular is because it definitely rewards holders, right? It rewards holders to essentially lock up their tokens for a period of time to and then of course delegate it to certain infrastructure providers to essentially validate, right? And I think if the network value is actually not significant, then the validators are actually loss making, right, in that sense. But we've seen actually a lot of validators kind of adopt a hybrid business model, but it's not just about making sure that they're profitable and running these operations from a fees perspective, right? For example, they charge a 3%, like a 4% validator fee or whatsoever, right? It's not just that, but they also are potentially investors in the network as well. So they have like almost like a hybrid way of thinking about things, where they're investing in network and also validating. So they're both a holder as well as a service provider of validator services. So I think that model has worked. And because also, if you look at all these networks, the developers have a lot more control. So I think for proof of stake networks actually really favors developers, right? It really favors developers and holders, but it doesn't really favor the pure play validator operators, right? And that's also the reason why you see a lot of these validators, whether it's like QuickNode or sort of like Figment, Coinbase or whatsoever, they also end up holding and investing in these tokens as well, right? So it kind of is almost like a by choice, like they have no choice but to do so. And I think that's just the nature of proof of stake networks, right? And I think that has worked for Ethereum, that has worked for some of these other ones, but I mean, there's also a lot of criticism against that model, right? Because of that. And if you look at the mining side of things, compared to that model, I think a lot of miners, as Charles mentioned earlier, they do not actually need with merge mining to believe in your project, right? They do not need to be, they're not forced to have to hold the tokens of your project. So I think that's a pro, but also a con at the same time, right? Because the bad thing of that, the downside of that, is that the developers and the holders feel like they're now antagonistic to the miners, right? So I think that's the alignment issue that sometimes can happen if you design the mechanism in a really bad way. The other risk that I've seen people sort of do highlight is that, let's say, for example, you are a coin that just launched or a project that just launched, and you are a merge mining mechanism using SHA-256D, right? That's a Bitcoin. And hypothetically, if 100% of the block rewards are going to merge mined, I think the issue is that if one of the mining pools, or maybe two, or some of the miners integrate with your project and the others don't, then you actually do have centralization to those parties that actually have integrated with you. So the key here is almost like an all or nothing kind of situation, where you actually really want your project, a successful merge mine-based project has to essentially have most of the mining pools and most of the miners to be interested, right? Otherwise, you actually have some level of centralization risk over here, right? And I think to what you mentioned earlier, there's like 51% attack, reorg, if risks, and so on. And you really don't want that, right? As a developer, as a project founder, which is also the reason why perhaps there's some like workarounds, and some people have designed innovations around that.
I'm happy I hit the nail with this question, because it's obviously something that you researched. I'm curious what you think about blind merge mining, which is introduced with BIP 300 and BIP 301, a proposal that's championed by one of the show sponsors, Layer 2 Labs. They're trying to bring Drivechains to Bitcoin. It's a way basically to enable miners to create merge mined sidechains. So they will be able to provide, for example, Ethereum and Zcash and Namecoin and whatever features on individual sidechains, and at the same time the miners also collect transaction fees from these chains. And I was wondering if you guys looked into that, and what do you think about it?
Definitely not the drivechain expert over here, but but from what I've understood, there's definitely some pros and cons with the proposal, right? I think there's like two risks that I'll just highlight, and I think definitely there's a lot of rewards, right, as you mentioned. So rewards really come from being able to have a lot more connectivity, a lot more developer environments, a lot more protocols, a lot more ideas packed to Bitcoin, right? And I think that's really amazing. And I think the thesis of that is something that I absolutely advocate for, right? That you actually have a lot of these more networks and have Bitcoin as a center, and have all of these networks essentially surround itself and provide rewards and have some level of incentive mechanism with Bitcoin. So the idea of it is definitely something that I'm a huge advocate for. There's definitely some risks with these proposals, right? One of the risks could be, miner software bloat, like the software that miners need to run may be bloated, right? Because a lot of these things, and I think that can be that is consensus breaking, that actually requires changing Bitcoin software, Bitcoin core. I think there's some of those risks over there, right? And obviously there may be updates to the proposal that I haven't seen, that I'm not super sure about. But I think anything that requires Bitcoin miners and the software layer, Bitcoin core, to change, I think is usually quite controversial, and the community, I think, feels like that may be spam or that may be unnecessary. So it's definitely a bit of that conversations and controversy over there. The other thing is that the other risk as well is that definitely having interrelations with Bitcoin is very, very helpful. But if we have entire dependence on Bitcoin, that may or may not be a good thing as well, right? So I'm a little bit unsure about that personally. I haven't, of course, dived into the economic theory of that or a lot of the implications of that. But I think definitely there's some things that we have to consider, right? In terms of like, hey, are we actually having too much dependence, right? Such that like if there's a point of failure somewhere that could be that could affect the entire system, right? So yeah, I think a lot of these things definitely requires a bit more careful I guess consideration and also proposals. But I think personally, for me at least, like I definitely think the idea of having a lot more interconnectivity to Bitcoin is awesome.
Charles, Summer, do you have any opinions on Drivechains?
Nope, I'm good there. I don't have too much to add over there.
It tends to be controversial sometimes, but I do think it's basically the ultimate idea to put everything on Bitcoin. I'm not aware of anything else which is this ambitious in its scope and also tries to solve the miners' rewards issue, which I think we're going to see in a few halving cycles.
Yeah, I think a lot of Bitcoiners are adequately concerned about the block rewards going to like near zero and essentially having to be sustained by fees, right? I think over the past 2 years, we've seen a lot of innovations on utility of Bitcoin block space that has also drove up fees to sometimes even 1,000 SEK per VB per block, right? Specifically, a few examples, right? One is, when people are rushing to mint BRC20s, ordinals, runes, and so on. And also when people are rushing to get into the cap of like Babylon staking, right? That I saw Babylon Bitcoin staking protocol for the phase 1 cap 1, where they had this mechanism and a game theory, right? Basically, at the end of the day, the Bitcoin block space is almost like a racetrack or whatsoever, right? When you design certain goals in games and rules, and people want to race on that, then of course you have a race condition, right? And then there's incentives and there's also fee rate changes and whatnot. And I think these are essentially, this is the design, right? It's permissionless, right? So anyone is able to do that. And if the participants are not economically incentivized in the long term or midterm, then they will stop doing such activities, right? So it kind of like naturally plays itself out. And I think that's kind of interesting, right? But I do think that, over time, there will be a lot more innovations happening. And I think we've seen a lot of companies and projects and protocols already start to be very innovative in how they think about essentially adding value to Bitcoin, from block rewards or from fees and so on. So definitely optimistic, but of course we have to have more innovation and acceptance as well in the community.
What do you think about the ongoing upper turn debate, with Bitcoiners disagreeing whether or not they should increase the capacity of the upper turn function, which enables some users to add more data to the Bitcoin blockchain without bloating the UTXO set? Is it bullish for Bitcoin?
Yeah,
Is it good for miner rewards? Or do you think it's just a fad and ultimately we're going to end up with the same empty mempool?
Personally, for me, I don't really have a very strong opinion about it, just because I think I think for myself, I think we are essentially quite neutral in how we, look at, Bitcoin development, right? We really want to support all actors. And sometimes that means, taking a side, not really having a very strong opinion about some of these issues, right? I think there's also like a very large group, and even in politics, right? And like in the country politics, there's a very large group of the silent majority that is actually quite neutral, right? And just kind of want to see more innovation or less innovation at the same time, right? So I think that's kind of, but of course the debate online has been very polarizing, right, between the different camps. With one camp, if I were to record, I think the debate really started because I think of a presentation, right, that was done at the UpNext event, sometime
No,
recently.
it was before that. It was a pull request on the Bitcoin Core GitHub repository. It was forwarded by Peter Todd, but it was on behalf of another core developer named Antoine. And it was about a company that's called Citrea, which is also a sponsor of the show, by the way. And what they're trying to do is basically add data as zero knowledge proofs that they're going to verify against their ZK rollup, which they're building on Bitcoin. And if they had a larger capacity on up return, they would be able to put the data without increasing the UTXO set, which is stored in RAM memory, not hard drives. So they made this request to make it, I guess, more lightweight for nodes to take this data. But it reignited like a decade-old debate, because this debate has been had in 2014 or something with Counterparty and Omni at the time. And I think it went way too far. Way too far. It's a nothing burger mostly.
Yeah. I do feel like it's really interesting that people have very strong opinions that they hold very strongly. And that's the case of Bitcoin, right? And I think we've navigated in the Bitcoin space for a while as well, and we know that this is very important. I think what I do like about this incident, at least, is that people are very passionate about their beliefs, right? Whether it's the the pro op return camp or the other camp and so on. And I think both sides have valid arguments from their perspective, right? About like preserving the status quo versus some of these changes that encourages projects, including Citrea, right? I don't think Citrea is really, I think Citrea is mentioned a lot in this particular debate, but it's really like, any project, right? You can replace it with any other project and they could make the same request. So I would say like, it's just one of those situations where everyone has their point of view. And I think that's really what, coming back a little bit to what the proof of work alliance in general is about as well, right? I think we want to be open to encourage the different opinions as well. If members have different opinions on certain issues, I think it's good, right? It just shows that a lot of these discourse can then be published online for people to view, request, and I think from social consensus, or maybe no social consensus at all, right? And just have it as is, right? So with the opportunity issue, I'm actually really curious what the outcome is going to be, is because like status quo is basically one camp winning, right? And making changes is a difference to the other camp. So I'm really curious what the situation is going to be. What is your prediction, Vlad, if you had to read between the tea leaves here?
Well, it seems to be like the technical consensus is that it makes no sense to keep the upper turn limit the way that it is right now, because mining pools are already including full blocks only with inscriptions or any sort of data. Marathon Holdings has their own service, which is called Upstream, if I'm not mistaken. And they can do this without actually using Bitcoin, without adhering to the rules of the Bitcoin network. So you're not going to be aware that this data is going to get added into blocks anyway. You're just going to see it when it gets added. And in a way, if you're lifting the limit, you're just enabling all the actors to be honest and to publish the data, and then every user can choose for themselves if they want to store that or if they believe it's not something that they want on their node. But I think there's too much, how should I put it? The conversation is too emotional and not rational enough. And I think that Bitcoin has much better goals to accomplish. And the fact that we're getting stuck with this conversation instead of talking about how can we help builders with CTV or CSFS, which is cross-function signature or whatever, it is saddening for me, because I realize, well, if we can't move the conversation forward to talk about what the builders need from Bitcoin to bring more applications to make it more useful, then I guess we're gonna get ossified. And I'm not sure what you think about ossification, but to me it feels like this technology has not really reached its potential. And if Bitcoin gets ossified, it just means that we're opening the gates for Ethereum to be useful, for Litecoin to be useful, so we're gonna have a multi-chain world. Even though some people will try to deny this and say, well, they're shitcoins, blah, blah, blah. They're going to be useful because people want to build stuff.
Yeah, I can take a step at this one, but I think like I feel the same way in many regards, and I think at the same time I also have I wear different hats, right? So I think at the end of the day, I think it's helpful for us to also define ourselves not just based on one point of view, right? And I think that's a very very strong point of view for me because I've been the reason why I came into crypto was because of innovation, because I'm an entrepreneur, I'm also a builder, right? So it really saddens me a little bit when people feel like Bitcoin should stop innovating, when people feel like, hey, nothing should be built on Bitcoin. We should just transfer it between institutions around the world, between governments and so on, and just use it to store all of our pension funds, right? And then maybe 30 years later, we think about it when we die, right? I think that saddens me a little bit if that is the vision for Bitcoin, and I may cry a little bit about it at night, right? If that is the case, right? But I think at the same time, maybe that's okay, right? I would say like a part of me feels like, hey, if that is the case, perhaps that is what we have achieved as an industry, and maybe everything else are just fun and games, right? If that is the case, then maybe that's okay, right? I think we have created a lasting legacy already. So a part of me is like, okay, I guess that is sad, but it's also okay in some regards, right? But at the same time, as an individual, or as like if you're building a startup, should you accept that status quo, or you accept that fate and not try to innovate at all? I don't think you should just accept it, right? You should also keep trying to build and make meaningful sort of contributions, right? And I think that's why a lot of these debates, whether it's op return, whether it's CTV and CSFS or OpCat and so on, I think it's interesting in that sense, where it creates the opportunity for builders to actually demonstrate what they can do, right? There's definitely the concerns from a security perspective, which is why I think it's good that the maintainers are being more cautious in how they view this. But at the same time, I think builders, it's also on builders, right, to show the world what can be done with these protocols. And we haven't yet seen some real applications that is very interesting with op return, the CTV, CSFS, and OpCat and so on. That's very, very good, right? So I would encourage actually more builders to build more applications, right, on SIGNet, on DevNet, and so on, to essentially try it out, right, and show the world what is possible. And I think if even when that use cases and a lot of those things happen, then it's almost inevitable, right, in that regard. So that's definitely what I hope to see. Yeah, I think from a proof of work alliance perspective, we definitely have like sort of participants in the network that are like protocols, and I think these protocols like Fractal specifically on our end, for or Psy or many others, I think they have like the ecosystem of builders, right? So I think it's also on us to try to encourage the builders to try things with a lot of these sort of like implementations and to show the way, right? And if those use cases become very important, then that could add to the conversation, like what Citrea and many other builders have done, then that's awesome, right? So I think that's what I do believe about it. That being said, I would say that there's a lot of other projects that have just been okay with ossification and innovate around that. That's also possible, right? I would say like that's definitely not ideal, but it's also possible. I think that's what you mentioned with many other chains, a multi-chain world, right? Yeah.
As miners, what's your opinion on ordinal inscriptions? Because for a while they brought some very high fees on Bitcoin, which I think were beneficial for keeping many of these businesses more profitable.
Yeah, I think from talking to miners, I think most miners love it. I think it was unexpected, so it wasn't built into their modeling and everything, and so I think most miners loved it. Yeah, I think
I think disappointed. Yeah, volumes are a little bit lower than Charles. I guess like if you mentioned, right, like they didn't put into their modeling, right? But after they exploded, I'm sure they will put into their modeling, right? So what is the take on the street? Yeah.
Yeah, I think most miners have been in this game for such a long time. They understood the volatility of it, so I don't think they looked at it in terms of, hey, this is gonna last for more than 6 months or a year. Again, maybe it will come back, but I think it still hasn't stood the test of time yet. I think one of the stats I saw was the total fees that were paid out from ordinals was more than $200 million. So that's definitely a huge revenue for the miners.
Yeah, and that's not even including the value of some of these projects, right? But I'd say the counterpoint to that is also like a lot of the exchanges and the liquidity venues are like not ready for it. So like what we have observed as well is that many times they're almost like resistant to it, right? And they think that Bitcoin innovation is not real in this regard, right? And I think in some ways that's also the issue, I think, with the with what we have observed. Like the Bitcoin community sometimes is quite anti-spam, anti-altcoins and so on. And I think that has also dampened a little bit of the spirits of innovators in that regard. So it's like a double-edged sword, right? And also at the same time, we've seen, many of the exchanges don't really want to support Bitcoin protocols, right? Even though there's a very robust set of APIs that is available to support runes, ordinals, BRC20s, and so on. And as a result, even like this dog to the moon on runes, they essentially bridged their token over to Solana, and then now they're potentially added to the roadmap for Kraken, right? As was recently announced. But I do believe, and please, Kraken, feel free to correct me on this podcast or on tweets or whatever. If you're integrating the Rune standard, right? I don't think they are. I think they're just integrating the Solana standard, which is kind of sad. That Bitcoin innovation has to be on other chains to be listed on these exchanges.
It was the same, I think, 4 years ago during the NFT mania, when all of these assets that were historical and created on Bitcoin, they had to be tokenized and wrapped on Ethereum to be sold on OpenSea, because that's where the liquidity was. It wasn't the Bitcoiners who were paying for it. It was the Ethereum people who had the money to pay for this stuff. So yeah, it's a bit unfortunate that the infrastructure that's being built for these markets is not always happening on Bitcoin. Also with Polymarket, it's a bit saddening because prediction markets have been such a big talking point in Bitcoin for a decade, and now it's happening on Ethereum.
Yeah, I think in some ways maybe the originator of the ideas doesn't have to be the one to actually bring it to practice. Sometimes that happens, right? It's like sometimes a lot of ideas are stuck in the research circles, and then it takes a company like Google or whatever to implement, right? But I really don't like that reference. I really don't think Bitcoin is like the citadel of of just like nothing gets done. I really don't think that's the intention as well.
I took a look at gas fees right now, and on Ethereum it's 61 cents to send USDT. On Tron it's $7.51 to send USDT, and the Bitcoin fees right now are 31 cents. And the networks that I mentioned are proof of stake. They don't contribute to any proof of work company as far as I'm aware. They're not supporting innovation in the field of proof of work. And it's a bit, how should I put it? Feels defeating when you realize that people are willing to pay $7 to send a transaction on Tron, but they don't value Bitcoin block space as much, and they don't want to make transactions. And do you believe this is detrimental to the adoption of Bitcoin and to proof of work in general? Or do you believe it's just a phase and it's gonna change?
Yeah, I do have some loose opinions about some weak opinions about stablecoins in general, right? I think for me, my point of view is that I think stablecoins were started really as just a necessary part of the Bitcoin community because of the unfriendliness of banks, right, towards Bitcoin. So a lot of people, a lot of Bitcoiners used USDT back in the day that was on Omni, which is essentially like a Bitcoin layer 2, right? Maybe one of the earlier Bitcoin layer 2s to essentially send USDT to each other, and it's verified. So I think over the last couple of years, we've seen that to really change quite a little bit, where maybe as banks become more open to crypto and so on, USDT just became more of almost like a financial settlement kind of layer. And definitely there's a lot of innovations happening at the stablecoin layer, right? But I think I actually see no reason why Bitcoin network shouldn't have stablecoins on it, right? We've seen some recent advancements where Tether announced that they want to do taproot asset support with Lightning and whatnot. And candidly speaking, even if Tether were to, or USDC were to actually launch a version of their token on BRC20 standard or Rune standard today, they're actually able to. There is a mint and burn, mechanism in BRC20 that allows them to actually mint stable coins, and and if you think about it, if that's the case, if the current Tether VB is 30 cents, 30 cents, then that actually means that if they actually do that, someone sending, if I were to send stablecoin to you on Bitcoin network, it's actually faster and cheap. Maybe it's not faster, but it's definitely cheaper than on Tron. So maybe that should be a choice that we should be giving to users, right? Yeah, but that's one part of it. And the other part is I think we'll see what happens in the US when it comes to the Genius Act, whether the regulation is actually good or not for stablecoins, because that actually helps to create more of a framework. And in some ways, I prefer always no or light regulation, and have the entrepreneurs and the builders kind of dictate what it is. But at the same time, I also do understand the hesitancy of some of the banks when it comes to the stablecoin side of things. So maybe that actually helps them to accept a lot of these payments a little bit more. So overall, I do think first of all that Bitcoin should have stablecoins on it, right? And I think it's possible and it's already here. It's just whether or not these providers are investing the time and infrastructure to do so. And number two, I definitely think that stablecoins are created in the past as like almost like a necessity, but these days it's the necessity is a little bit different, right? It's more about the relationships with traditional finance that's more important. Yeah.
I want to ask each one of you how you're celebrating Pizza Day, and I have this box here. It's an important Bitcoin moment when Laszlo Haniec, 15 years ago, he sold 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas. But before that, please allow me to plug the rest of the sponsors that I haven't mentioned as much. So I have been telling you for months that when you get paid in stablecoins, it's a good idea to use SideShift to convert that to Bitcoin or free market money. If you did that, today we're at an all-time high of $111,000, 111 USD, 111111. So if you have been doing that, I guess I was right. If you do believe that this is the top, you can also use SideShift for converting BTC back to USDT if you're into that. I'm not going to judge if you're a bear, but I do believe we're going to go higher from here. So check out sideshift.ai for these swaps without registration. There is also hodling.ch, which specializes in self-custody. So if you want to learn more about how to set up your multi-sig because you have a lot of Bitcoin or because you're part of a company that's going to acquire Bitcoin, go to hodling.ch and access their consultancy for self-custody. I think that's the best way to put it. There's also nuance.com, which is a peer-to-peer marketplace for the global south. They have a lot of users from Africa and the Middle East. And the CEO, Ray Youssef, believes in this vision of bringing adoption where it really makes a difference. So if you do want to provide some liquidity to these markets, check out nuance.com. And last but not least, bitcoin.com news, which right now, bitcoin.com used to be green. They used to be for Bitcoin Cash. Now they did this U-turn. They're BTC only. They changed their logo. It's orange. They have news that is only about BTC. They understand the difference between BTC and BCH. It's really a miracle. 7 years ago, you would not believe that this was going to happen. And they have pretty good news articles. And it was my idea to promote them because it seems like they're on the good side of history now. So check out bitcoin.com news. They have some good journalism. And now I'm going to start with Summer because she's the shyest one who has spoken the least during this interview. Tell us more about how you're celebrating Pizza Day. You're muted.
Again. Sorry, I always forget that. So I think we are going to order pizza for sure. And if we can tip the delivery guy inside, that will be amazing. And then also explain to a friend about what Bitcoin really stands for. That's our plan for today, how to celebrate it. I like your t-shirt with the pizza.
Yeah, I actually got this from a French fashion house. It's called Maison Machi. They're making fashion for nerds. And yeah, I didn't pay for this, but it's like 600 euro. But they basically sent it to me to wear it. Yeah.
Nice.
That is the best t-shirt for today. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a long sleeve t-shirt or a t-shirt, but it looks amazing.
It's a good excuse, to wear this. I usually don't have a proper occasion for it. I just wear it. But today, it's a proper justification. So how do you guys celebrate Pizza Day?
Yeah, on our end, I've just eaten a pizza in under, I think, 2 minutes. I took a stab at the New York pizza because I'm in New York right now. And so I got this like $1 pizza that's like massive, and then did a video of myself doing that. And then on the Fractal Bitcoin side, we have this like 1 minute pizza challenge where anyone is invited to submit a video like tweet at us, because we have a tweet, just like retweet or reply to the tweet with like a 1-minute video of yourself eating pizza. So a lot of our friends and our team members actually has done that recently from all across the world. So it's really nice to see. Charles, how about you?
So that's what I did as well. So a 1-minute pizza challenge to see how much we can eat in a minute. I know Spencer got a 2-minute exemption, but yeah, it's supposed to be a 1-minute challenge.
Yeah,
I'm
take
allowed
that,
to cheat a little
Saifedean.
bit on this one.
Saifedean is this guy who advocates for only eating steak, and today we're eating pizza, so we're not sorry for it.
Yeah, I think it's worth celebrating, right? The industry deserves to celebrate. We've been beaten a little bit here and there as an industry, a lot of people, and I think the coordination layer is definitely difficult to navigate. But I think it's moments like these that help to remind us why we're here, right? And I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. There's someone in the chat who asked about the Fractal Bitcoin token. They want to know about the team. What do you think about the price action of your coin since launch? Do you have any comment on that?
In general, I don't really comment on price itself, right? But I think specifically, when it comes to launching any projects in the space, even like Bitcoin, right? It's going to be a volatility, right? Volatility is definitely something that is, it's a feature. It's not really a bug; it's really a feature, right? And I think at the end of the day, it's really down to demand and supply. So usually, when demand is higher, usually when projects, especially proof of work projects, right, when they launch initially, the demand is very, very high at the beginning, right? And that actually changes and creates a sort of these artificial price levels that is very, very high, right? Because the initial supply of proof of work networks is a lot lower at the beginning, and then over time, it actually becomes a lot more stable, right? So even for Bitcoin itself, right? Like when it first started, because there was a relatively low awareness, right, at the beginning, so the demand was not like 100 million people buying Bitcoin, right? If that is the case, then I think Bitcoin would have started maybe at $1 million instead of at what it was, right? But I think over time, as attention and as adoption goes, that's awesome. So I think that's also a challenge for a lot of proof of work projects, where the initial demand might be too high. Right now, in the crypto ecosystem, I think maybe one of the issues to address as well is that a lot of the projects are essentially tailored for the proof of stake networks, right? Where initial demand is actually going to be a lot higher, and then they are able, because the project somehow has very high control of the supply of the tokens, they are able to then release a lot more of the supply into the market and then manage the price levels, right? I think that's not a benefit of something that proof of work projects have. So that's something that I think we should also maybe do a bit of more research as an alliance for, to understand better on how maybe there's ways for the ecosystem to have better price discovery around proof of work projects as well. Yeah, definitely work to do there.
There's also Bcash in the chat, and he says, "Where's the Bcash representation?"
Yeah, I think like what Charles mentioned earlier, like the Proof of Work Alliance is definitely an alliance that every ecosystem provider is welcome to participate in. So yeah, anyone can apply on the website, and then the founding members and also the team members will then review and also engage accordingly.
Yep, I'll do a plug here. Our website is powalliance.com.
I was gonna ask you about that, but before I gotta mention that XMRE said needs some keto carnivore pizza for all of the maxis. But I want to ask each one of you, where can people find you and follow your projects?
Somebody want to go first?
So you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter is SummerMom21. And also you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can find me by SummerMom also.
I gotta ask, why 21? Is it because of the 21 million of Bitcoin?
Yes. But I just mentioned it at the very beginning. Yes, it is.
I don't think
Awesome.
that was recorded, but yeah, it's useful to know. And it's Summer Meng, Meng, right?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Spencer Yang, and also on Twitter at Fractal Bitcoin, and also at Blockspace Force. So I don't think we talk about Blockspace Force much, but essentially we are just a small family office, for the partners, and really our goal is really to work on anything that is Bitcoin proof of work related, and be very, very helpful to the industry in the long term.
Yep, for me, I'm part of the Fractal and Blockspace Force team. You can find me on Twitter, Charles Chong.
Okay, thank you very much. We agreed for 1 hour. I guess we went for a bit longer. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your dedication. Good luck with the Proof of Work Alliance. I look forward to your announcements to see what's new in the space. Once again, it's exciting that Proof of Work is getting more love in an industry that seems to shift away from it. And what else? If you have been listening up to this point, type POWA in the comments, and that's how we're going to know that you have been listening to all of this interview. It's like a secret code for the listeners, just in case. I don't know. I'm just testing to see who's listening to this. And thank you very much. I'll see you in the next one. And thanks to the sponsors once again: Noans.com, Hodling.ch, Siteshift.ai, Citrea.xyz, Bitcoin.com News, and Layer 2 Labs. Bye, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.